Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to be with us here tonight for our event, Equity in Active Transportation, a panel discussion and review. I'm Samantha Tremmel-Lamb. I'm the Plan Manager with Climate Action Waterloo Region. And we're really fortunate to have a tremendous team of volunteers through our sector committees here at Climate Action. Our committee members take on projects and initiatives related to the 3 highest emitting sectors in our community's greenhouse gas inventory. So that's transportation, workplaces, and homes. And this event has been curated and presented by our Transportation Sector Committee. So we thank them for all their time and dedication that has gone into this work. In particular, I'd like to recognize Maria Legault, Dorothy McCabe, and R.C. Keneme for organizing this great event for you all today. So today's event is going to begin with a panel discussion, followed by a series of smaller group presentations to learn about and discuss just a few programs and initiatives that are occurring within our community. So before we jump in, just a couple quick notes about Zoom. We'll just ask that you please remain muted during this main session content, just so that we don't have any crossover and we can hear everyone clearly. We'll also ask that aside from the panelists and the moderator, if folks can keep their cameras off, that will actually help us save on some bandwidth and reduce the likelihood of any technical difficulties. And as we go, feel free to add your questions in the chat. So we might be able to take some questions from the audience after the panel discussion, but even if we don't get to them, I think it's a really great way to understand what are the questions that folks in the community want to know, because that will just help take our work even further. And as you probably have already seen, this meeting is being recorded. The breakout rooms will not be recorded, just the main session here and the panel discussion. So a little about Climate Action Waterloo Region. We are a collaboration between local organizations, community members, and municipalities within Waterloo Region. And our focus is on climate change mitigation, so reducing greenhouse gas emissions at their source. We are co-led by both Reap Green Solutions and Sustainable Waterloo Region. And we are funded by the Region of Waterloo and the cities of Kitchener, Cambridge, and Waterloo, although we work very collaboratively with all 8 municipalities in the region, which includes the 4 townships of North Dumfries, Wilmot, Wellesley, and Woolwich as well. Our intention in tonight's workshop is to begin a learning journey to understand the landscape of equitable access to active transportation in Waterloo Region that will ultimately lead to or contribute to protecting and promoting stewardship of the land through climate action efforts. I myself am a settler on this land, and through the Dish with One Spoon Treaty, settlers and Indigenous people alike have a responsibility to safeguard the land and water that we live on. And our intention with this workshop is to share knowledge of sustainability best practices, largely from a settler perspective, to help others learn how to be environmental stewards and fulfill our treaty responsibilities. So we hope to continue to learn how to integrate Indigenous knowledge and other knowledge systems into our sustainability education and actions. And we hope that the discussions that are starting here tonight will continue to grow across our community so that we can do that. And we would be grateful to hear from you during or after this workshop if you'd like to share your sustainability knowledge as well. Land and territorial acknowledgement is only one small part of supporting Indigenous communities. But we hope our territorial acknowledgement statement will inspire others to stand with us in solidarity with Indigenous peoples. We acknowledge that Waterloo Region is located on the traditional territory of Indigenous peoples, including the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral peoples. We recognize the enduring presence of the Indigenous people here that we share this land with today and their contributions to our community. We value their traditional knowledge about how to live sustainably on this land we share and will leave for future generations. Climate Action Waterloo Region is committed to the necessary learning, relationship building, and actions to work towards reconciliation. And we hope tonight is a starting point for some of that really important work ahead of us. As many of you might already know, in June of this last year, all 8 municipalities in Waterloo Region endorsed Transform WR, Waterloo Region's transition to an equitable, prosperous, resilient, low carbon community. This is our long-term strategy to achieve an 80% greenhouse gas reduction by 2050. So human-generated emissions come from many different sources. However, most of our emissions come from our energy use. We burn fossil fuels to power cars and equipment, to heat our homes and cool our homes. And in our last greenhouse gas emission inventory that was done in 2015, we found that locally, 94% of our emissions were produced by energy consumption and combustion from transportation, workplaces, and homes. And within these sectors, there's 6 primary energy sources that contribute to greenhouse gases, with gasoline being the highest at 41%. So as a result, addressing our local emissions is primarily about changing our energy use and in some cases, reducing it altogether. So active transportation, you're gonna hear this term a lot tonight. It means any method of traveling to a destination that uses primarily human power, such as walking, cycling, or rolling. This includes trips made using or propelled by your body, a mobility device, a bicycle or tricycle, a skateboard, or a scooter. And in 2015, nearly half of our community's emissions came from how we move people and goods. Further to that, short distance trips of less than 5 kilometers make up nearly 50% of all travel by residents within the region that could generally be achieved using active forms of transportation. Now, not all individuals and communities have the resources to transition to low or no emission transportation, and programs to address diverse barriers must be implemented so that all residents can travel easily and safely to their destinations. These programs must be designed in partnership with equity deserving groups and consider interconnected barriers such as safety, funding, education, and community design. So the Transform WR strategy outlines a key goal related to active transportation, and that's that by 2030, 10% of personal vehicle trips under 5 kilometers will be replaced by using active transportation. And that jumps up to 80% by 2050. So there's some really ambitious but achievable goals here. And tonight is a starting point to understand the landscape of equitable access to active transportation in our community. What great work has already happened, what lies ahead. We won't and don't have all those answers, but again, this event is one step in the right direction to support this work. So with that, I'd like to introduce our moderator for tonight's panel discussion, Dorothy McCabe. Dorothy is a member of our Transportation Sector Committee, a longtime supporter of and participant in local climate initiatives. She's an active cyclist herself and a proud resident of Waterloo Region. So with that, Dorothy, I turn to you. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Samantha. And hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. I'm just going to take a couple minutes to introduce our panelists, our fabulous panelists, and then we'll get started. We certainly are really thrilled that you're with us tonight, and particularly that we have a really good cross-section of people from the municipal sector, community organizations, just regular citizens like myself who are interested in learning more and contributing to this conversation. So again, we do really want to thank our panelists. We know they're very busy people, and we also want to thank the presenters who will be hosting the discussions in the breakout rooms. We do want to make a note, because this is an environmental discussion, that they're all locally sourced from our community to discuss this important topic. So, and particularly, we're really excited that they'll be sharing their insights, their expertise, and especially their passion for active transportation. So, and as Samantha mentioned, tonight is another step in this journey to build a more equitable community for all of us and to build a better transit and transportation system. So someone recently said to me, you break ground when you have common ground. So that's really what we're looking for through these discussions. And so the price of admission tonight is that we ask that you complete a short survey that will be sent to you after this discussion. Because again, we are really interested in the information and the perspective and the experience that each of you have. So our panelists, I'll start with Samantha Leger. Maybe you can give a wave there, Samantha. Samantha is currently a PhD candidate with the University of Waterloo School of Planning. Her research is focused on the politics of walking. Prior to starting her PhD, Samantha obtained a Master of Research in Interdisciplinary Urban Design from the University College London in the United Kingdom. She also has a Bachelor of Urban Planning from the University of Waterloo. So alongside her academic interests, Samantha has over 2 years' experience working in transportation planning consulting and is currently working with the Canadian engineering firm CIMA Plus as an urban planner. And her focus is active transportation planning. And that includes active transportation master plans and trail master plans. So she will be contributing both as an academic and as a planning practitioner. So thank you very much and welcome, Samantha. Arcy Kuname, if you want to wave there, Arcy. Arcy works for Sustainable Waterloo Region as the TravelWise program manager. So TravelWise is an internationally recognized program, workplace program available to employers across Waterloo Region. So Arcy works closely with TravelWise member organizations to elevate and support their sustainable commuting plans and actions. And Arcy is also, this is an election year after all, he is the volunteer bicycle mayor of Waterloo and promotes cycling in the city and across the region. So as the bike mayor, Arcy collaborates with people and organizations to create an environment that will encourage more people to ride their bike. In 2021, he reached out to the Immigration Waterloo Region and KW Multicultural Center about their initiative on racial equity in Waterloo Region and led this group on a bike ride to discuss racial equity with a number of community members. So I think on nearly every day of the year, maybe with the exception of Monday with that snowstorm, you can find Arcy on his bike somewhere in Waterloo Region. So thank you, Arcy, for joining us tonight. So next we have Cornell Mucci. He is the planner of he's the manager, of transportation planning at the region of Waterloo. Cornell leads a small team of engineers responsible for long-term planning of the region's multimodal transportation system and is responsible for building an active transportation program. So Cornell has over 25 years experience in planning and implementing sustainable transportation solutions, including the past decade, where he primarily focused on active transportation. And he was recently in Ottawa, where he spearheaded the implementation of the fully separated cycle tracks and protected intersections in that city. And Cornell has shared that one of his professional objectives is to work with colleagues from the region and area municipalities to develop a cycling network, which will allow children to travel safely anywhere in the region on their own on a bicycle. So fantastic dream there. Thank you, Cornell. And certainly last but not least is Joe Mancini, who I think may really not need an introduction. Joe and his wife, Stephanie, in 1982, when Joe, I think, was about 5, they started the Working Center, which is in downtown Kitchener. The Working Center serves across Waterloo Region and is involved in extensive homelessness outreach work, including at the St. John's Kitchen, where they distribute up to 400 meals each day. The Working Center runs an 80-person interim housing project for those who are formerly homeless, and they operate a 60-person emergency warming center at St. Andrews. They also have 80 other supportive housing units and operate a busy employment resource center. So Joe and the Working Center have also been very involved and very vocal about making transit and transportation more equitable and accessible, particularly for low-income people in our community. In 1999, they launched Recycle Cycles Community Bike Shop as one of their community tool projects, and that's based out of the Working Center. And before the pandemic, 5,000 people a year used the public bike stands at Recycle Cycle, and up to 800 bikes were refurbished and sold with 50 regular weekly volunteers, which was quite an accomplishment. And Joe's too modest to include this in his bio, but in 2016, both him and Stephanie were awarded the Order of Canada in recognition of their tremendous and long-term community service. So as you can see, we have a very high caliber panelist with us tonight. And again, we're very grateful to them for giving us their time. So enough of me talking. Nearly enough of me talking. We'll get started with some of these questions. And we have prepared a number of questions for the panelists. And certainly not each of you don't have to respond to every question. Again, we've given your different backgrounds and expertise and experiences. Certainly feel free to build on each other's responses, because that will give us a really holistic, rich information and perspectives about this topic. So, but if you just aren't prepared to answer part of the question, feel free to pass on, and we can get you involved in another question. So to the attendees, you are muted, but we do strongly encourage you to use the chat function to comment on information that the panelists are providing. If something inspires you or moves you or is making a connection for you or is an aha moment, please put that in the chat. It's really good information for us to have. And we will monitor the chat. And as Samantha said, if time allows, we can take some questions potentially from there. So I am nearly done talking briefly. I'll turn it over to the panelists. So our first question, and maybe I'll start with the academic in the crowd, Samantha. Ladies first. So what do you mean when you speak about equitable access to active transportation? This is a kind of a multi-part question, so I can certainly repeat this. So what do you mean when you speak about equitable access to active transportation? What conditions need to be in place to move us towards equitable access? What key barriers do you think we face locally, and what also are some of our opportunities? So we'll start with Samantha and then open it up to the rest of the panelists.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. And again, thank you for having me on this panel. I'm really excited to be part of this discussion. So equitable access to active transportation is, to me, a two-part issue, but comes back to the common goal of distributing the benefits of active transportation that we so often talk about, which are economic, social, and environmental, fairly throughout our population. And to me, this has implications both when we talk about the distribution of active transportation, so the distribution of infrastructure throughout our communities, but also comes back to asking, well, who can actually access that infrastructure? And this brings in the second piece of equity, which is the experiential dimension. We know that many different population groups have different needs and different predispositions as to what makes them comfortable out using active transportation. And we need to consider those when we talk about access to active transportation. And I believe that the snowstorm that we all just experienced just this week speaks to this. Even if we have a complete sidewalk network through our communities, if the full life cycle of that infrastructure, meaning not just where it's placed, but also the maintenance of it, isn't considered, then we won't have truly equitable active transportation. So for example, someone who might have a physical disability may have not been able to be out walking post the snowstorm if the sidewalks weren't cleared properly. And so to me, equitable active transportation really comes down to those two dimensions, both distribution and experiential. And it comes back to thinking of all these different experiences that can occur. And that's kind of my answer for the first part of the question. I don't know if we want to pass it off and hear from others, or if you want me to keep going through to the other pieces of it.
Well, yeah, why don't we pause there and see RC, Cornell, Joe, if any of you wanted to jump in on that. Sure, go ahead, Cornell. And again, this isn't about finger pointing or anything like that. When we're talking about, people certainly we're fairly vocal, I think, about some of the challenges on Monday with respect to the infrastructure and snow clearing and things like that. So, but go ahead, Cornell. Oh, you're on mute, Cornell.
Samantha provided an excellent kind of summary, and it reminds me of my university days. And now let me translate it how I experienced it myself. I mentioned the children, you know, that my dream, and actually, I mean, that was not just a dream. I mean, that's how I grew up. You know, I lived in a city of half a quarter million people, not too big, not too small, but from probably grade 9, I cycled to school 5 kilometers every single day, and my parents probably they didn't worry. They never told me that they worried. And I cycled through the downtown center and to the other part of the city. So it is possible. I know that it's possible. And not just in other countries, in this country as well. But I know also that this is not how our cities are built, because I have 4 children. I drove them for too many years to activities, almost on a daily basis, and my wife as well. So they grew up in a very different environment. And that has been obvious because whenever we travel somewhere, I see that they are just kind of a little bit afraid, you know, of trying to make decisions where to go, how to move in a different city. Now, going back to the 3rd generation, I hope that the 3rd generation will have that opportunity in the region. And it is possible. And I think that is one part of the equity. But I mean, there are some well-known people who actually defined it very nicely, that the city that is good for children in terms of transportation is good for everyone. And probably you recognize it. It was Enrique Peñalosa. And the other thing that I would describe as my own experience is that, you know, I have a good job now, but it was not always the same thing. I mean, I was not so fortunate all my life, but transit has been always there for me. And even in Canada, in the cities where I lived. And that is another important thing, that transit should be accessible and desired, no matter of the social economic status. And if you achieve that for these 2 things, then I think that we have done quite a bit in terms of equity. I mean, there are still other things, but I mean, that would cover, I would say, the majority things that in transportation, me as a transportation engineer or planner can contribute to.
Great, thanks, Cornell. RC or Joe, did you want to weigh in on that question? Again, it's what do we mean when we speak about equitable access? And what conditions need to be in place? What key barriers do you see that we're facing? And then as well, what opportunities do you see?
I'll go ahead and share.
Okay, go ahead, RC.
And I think what the other panelist has mentioned is really what I had also in my notes in terms of trying to identify or trying to describe it. But the way I look at it simply is the equity lens has to be applied to how the active transportation network is planned, designed, and managed. But there's also an important factor, because that side is more of like the physical infrastructure. There'll be people, there'll be teams who will be designing the active transportation infrastructure. The other side is also the human infrastructure we're in. And I'll just speak about myself. When I migrated to Canada 16, 17 years ago, my friends, my neighbors, they just like, they had a car. And I look at them and I also want a car. And coming from the Philippines, you are successful if you have a car. And so that's also, I think, part of it. We're in that mind shift from what we see and experience from our a culture that we have experienced, and and looking at the options that we have now, I was so lucky when we migrated, I was able to find a job on Weber. And I knew where my work was. So I just said, let's just find an apartment near my place of work. So we found one 30 minutes away. So I was walking to work and eventually cycling to work. From a 30-minute walk, it became a 15-minute walk. So I think in my experience, being an immigrant and a family, that I really needed to find work, it was good that the mobility or transportation side was addressed. And so the way I look at it now is there should be, in a way, a clear definition and identification of places in our community. A term that we use in climate action is equity deserving neighborhoods. If those neighborhoods will have access to active transportation, the active transportation network, and the transit network, then it will be easier for those members of our community to be able to go to work, to go to school, and to other places. I think it is also important that the social equity, and also I think part that was mentioned earlier is the spatial equity, are combined for a more holistic perspective in identifying those equity deserving neighborhoods. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thanks, Arcy. And I think I could see that Joe wants to add to this.
Oh yeah. I'm glad I'm following Arcy. The issue of culture has always been a really a strong part of how Working Center has thought about bikes. And so it was always clear to us back in the 90s, St. John's Kitchen and the front of St. John's Kitchen, the front of the Working Center, always had a ton of bikes in front of our spaces. And I think that was always contrasted against other places. And it's just that, you know, people of lower income, people without work, found their way around by bikes. So Recycle Cycles for us was absolutely an equity kind of project, but we tried to dress it up as a project for everybody, a project that really celebrated bikes in downtown Kitchener. And so I think that kind of infrastructure is really crucial. I remember we used to promote a book back in the 90s called Divorce Your Car. But just like Arcy's saying, there wasn't a lot of uptake, and people, when growing up in Hamilton in the 1970s, I remember that I traveled exclusively by bike all around the city, and that was just kind of that was just a naturalized way of getting around. I haven't ever felt that in Kitchener, and I don't think it's a difference. I think it's really the culture. Come the 1980s, it's always been around, buying a car. I bet you if you did an analysis of number of cars on the road, they're like number of cars per family. I bet you that's much higher. And in the meantime, those without keep getting pressed down, or less. They feel, as Ivan Illich says, there's those who drive cars and those who are pushed off the road by cars. And so the idea of Recycle Cycles and the promotion of bikes has always worked against the culture. But I have to say, I think there's aspects of it that are changing. I just want to say, there's so much I could say, but I do want to say one thing. someone contacted us the other day because there were two of we used to run a program called CAB, Community Access Bike Share. City of Waterloo was very helpful. The region, less so. Someone they called to say that they had two bikes that someone must have taken our bikes and left them in some student residence. But really, we hardly lost any bikes in the 3 years we ran CAB. And it really was a good local program, but it didn't get the support. And the support is the infrastructure. And there's this kind of sense, oh no, we got to give it to some outside company. And that outside company showed up and they were gone in a year, compared to something that's community-based that builds its way up. So Recycle Cycles has been that kind of a project, but it's never got a cent of community support outside of volunteer dollars. And I think that building that infrastructure is really crucial if you're going to change the culture. But there's a lot more to say about that, but that's just introduction.
Yeah, no, I know, Joe, from your time on these issues, that you have a deep knowledge of some of these issues, absolutely, and you've been, as I said, a very strong and vocal advocate for years around this. So just picking up on some of what the four of you were saying about building the infrastructure and the maintenance and things like that. Like, are there locally? Could you talk about maybe one or two or three initiatives that you have witnessed in our community that support equitable access, and maybe some of the successes that you've seen, but also some of the limitations of those initiatives, and maybe even where, like Joe, you were saying, where your project was built from the ground up without municipal or governmental support, but maybe touch on some local initiatives that are finding some beginnings of success, maybe facing some barriers, and where some there could be some cross-pollination or collaboration that would kind of give it that push forward.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I have about 3 examples if you want me to. Or I can talk about one of them.
Sure, go ahead.
Well, one I'm really tempted to talk about is the Region's Bus Pass program, which the Working Center administrated for at least 10 or 15. Well, it goes back to Mike Schmidt. No, I can't think of the commissioner. I've lost his name.
Mike Murray.
No.
Thomas
Before
Schmidt. Thomas Schmidt.
He wasn't commissioner he was commissioner of social services, but it was about 100. It started at 100,000, but it was getting closer to 1 million. I have a feeling by the end. It was regional money that was put into bus passes, and we were, I think it was about 1,200 people who would come to the Working Center to get a discount on their bus pass, and it was kind of cutting the cost of a bus pass in half. That was an outstanding program. It actually doesn't exist now anymore because of the LRT and the way the region does things, and if Stephanie was on this program, as you had invited her, she knows the actual details of where that went. But as a program, and there's all kinds of ways that can be done to give people free bus passes. This weekend, in the midst of the cold weather, the region issued us about 100 bus passes, like 2-way bus passes. So at least homeless individuals would be able to ride the LRT, or at least go from one place to another, which, the region does have that ability to use the infrastructure to support people. And so there's a very strong case to create the ability of people to get around by walking, by using the bus system, and strengthening that. So that would go such a long way. And the region has a really good experience, but commitment to trying to find ways to make the LRT, the GRT, accessible. I'm not sure that that's happening right now as it used to with the new LRT. So that, I think that's something that really needs to be analyzed.
To be looked at. Okay. To any of the other panelists, any initiatives that you're seeing some success locally, or things that are, I mean, Cornell, you mentioned that you grew up outside of our country, it sounds like, and same with you, RC, like, and certainly Samantha, I guess you lived for a time over in the United Kingdom. Like, are there examples of things from other communities that we should be looking at here, both as municipal government, citizen groups, like climate action, etc.?
Okay, if I can start.
Sure.
So I'd like to connect, I mean, the two questions here. One of the challenges and what have been the successes.
Mm-hmm.
And I absolutely agree on the importance of infrastructure. And I can tell you, I've been working on changing the way how we plan, build, and operate infrastructure from day one at my work, which was 95. First for transit, and then in cycling for the last 10 years or 12 years. And I can tell you, well, actually, I'm very well aware of the challenges. And the challenge is the profession, the transportation engineering and the planning profession, which has been trained for many, many years, for decades, to accommodate the cars. And there is no secret about that. Everybody knows it. Even we engineers and planners, we know it. I was trained.
I can see Samantha nodding her head vigorously too.
Program signals, how to build roads. I was not trained how to design cycling facilities, although my city has cycling facilities, but never. And actually, when I started my education or continued my education here at the University of Toronto, I wanted to learn about signals, how to design signals for cars to maximize capacity, minimize delay. And it was at my work where I started to focus on transit. And it's a huge, huge uphill battle. You are fighting your profession. Fighting your profession means two things. One is that it's very difficult to progress in your career. And the second thing, you will have many enemies or they will discard you. So burnout is part of that life. Now, I survived burnouts and in and outs, but I did, and I learned. And I learned that we must change the profession. And actually, I can tell you for the last 10 years, the profession has been changing tremendously. And many of those who I was arguing, fighting, actually, they gave up on the profession. And they said that I don't want to do anything with the Institute of Transportation Engineers anymore. Because they say they are doing things which are wrong. Even my first boss in Ottawa, I mean, a year or 2 years ago, I talked to him and he said, imagine the city wants to do this and this. And actually, it was my initiative. And it was the advisory bike lane, you know, and I'm not sure if you know, advisory bike lane, we implemented one which worked perfectly, and he just could not see it working. But otherwise, we are very good friends and everything else. But professionally, we don't see eye to eye. So that is a huge thing that has to change. Now, I started my job here in the region of Waterloo, and actually apparently they were looking for someone who likes to get into fights like me. But I can tell you that it is a different environment. I mean, the culture of the organization has to change. And what I feel that actually the organization is kind of ready for change in the region. But that is number one, that you're ready for change. Number two is that you know how to change, what to do, what are the new things. And that is something that you cannot just implement from one day to another. I mean, engineers, you know, I'm not sure if you know an engineer, I mean, they are kind of thinkers, but they like to follow processes, standards, guidelines. And the standard and guidelines are kind of carved into stone. In North America, you know, and we have to uncarve it or recarve it. And that is actually happening. I worked with MTO for years. That is another kind of difficult organization, but we did get successes. And Book 18, which is the new cycling design guide, which came out the second edition, is kind of an excellent source. And I would say that 80% what we need to design good cycling facilities in that book. And and we started the training in the region. So a month ago, we had a training. We had almost 40 people from the region and from the cities participating in the training. And it was a pretty good uptake in that. And that will help us because, I mean, you know, when I started in the region, I saw that, I was actually surprised how many cycling facilities exist. But I was also surprised how many different kinds and the trials are ongoing. That sometimes you put the crosswalk on this side, sometimes on the other side, sometimes on both sides. But that is part of a growing, you know, that you are trying various things. So what we are trying now, actually what I'm trying to do, and actually it's pretty successful, that we are trying to narrow down those alternatives to those which I know that they work, that we have seen in other places that they work. I have actually implemented quite a few of those in Ottawa, and it was difficult. You know, half of my hair was lost there. I mean, just arguing. And I can tell you that the race cycle track, which is kind of new in the region, we haven't built many, totally separated from the road for the full curb. I spent 5 years arguing for that, fighting for that, burned bridges, and then after 5 years, or actually today, that is the standard. Every street which is rebuilt gets that type of cycling facility. But I can tell you, I burned bridges there with my colleagues, and I had to spend years to rebuild those bridges so that we could go on. Mm-hmm. So it is a difficult path, but yeah, I mean, if you choose that to change the world, then don't expect that everybody will pat you at your back, at least for a number of years. Maybe later, when you're too old, maybe they will say, "Oh, maybe he did something good," you know.
A prophet's
anyway,
never
so we are looking at those cycling facilities, and every design now that has been initiated lately, I mean, since the last year, goes through us, my group, and we have the discussions. We discuss it with the consultants, with the cities, with our staff, with maintenance staff. And actually, we are coming to a decision, which is actually, you will see that it is a much bigger, much better facility type that we used to see on our streets.
So that sounds like some initiative, some good stuff happening there. And I heard standardization. I heard about culture, as Joe and RC had mentioned, and I think I also heard something that I think rings true probably for all of us, is that support the staff that are trying to move in that direction, right? Like, we do need to be mindful of that, support where there is good work being done. But I think, Samantha, you wanted to jump in here.
Yeah. Oh, sorry,
Dorothy, could I just mention that Tom Galloway did just put it in the chat that the region's subsidized bus pass program is at $3 million now. So that, you know, that was at $1 million, say 7 or 8 years ago, and it has been increased. So I guess other people would know exactly how that's being handled.
Right, great.
But it's really important information.
Yes, that is. Yeah, thanks for noting that. I haven't actually been checking the chat, so thanks for mentioning that, Joe, and thanks, Regional Councillor Galloway, for joining us, but also for providing that information. So, Samantha, and then RC, if you wanted to add anything to this.
Yeah, so I think that some of the points that Cornell spoke about there are so important when we unpack equity and active transportation, because you really highlight how much of an uphill battle it is just to even get active transportation out in our car culture. So it takes a lot of work to get a single bike lane out. And so, moving towards a world where we even have start having these more fulsome conversations about equity and active transportation and who's actually being able to use these infrastructures first has to get past this massive wall of even just getting active transportation out the door and getting it into our communities and seeing it built. And I think that's such an important piece to bring up in this conversation, because it speaks to the massive barriers that can be faced in terms of getting active transportation as a really functional piece of our transportation system. And I also wanted to kind of speak to a few anecdotes there. I have in my research, I work a lot in the history and the critical history of the street and where car culture came from and how it expanded into just being such a way of life in North America. And anecdotally, in New York, the first bike lane went down in the 1800s, and then the next one wasn't built until 1980. And so what a massive space where the car really exploded and took over our streets and the way that we planned for them. And the same kind of experiences happened here in Canada, and there's some really great work out there that tracks this and speaks to when in 1910, in the early 1900s, when we started to regulate pedestrian flow and had jaywalking laws come in, and how that started to change the way that the street functioned and who it was functioning for. And taking that back is going to be a long process, because we've come so expected to be that the car is what's allowed on the street and the other uses are not. And I think that is a big piece of when we work towards equity in active transportation, is just talking about how do we even work with traffic safety, because traffic itself also is such a big piece of getting more diverse populations out using active transportation, is when there's a safe roadway system and not those traffic safety barriers. If it's nerve-wracking to be out on the street, you're going to remove certain populations from feeling comfortable. And in my work too, I look at a lot of older adult mobility and older adult active transportation and lifelong cycling. And a big thing we hear in that space is, if the traffic safety was better, if I felt more comfortable out on the roads, then maybe I would go out and be more active. I don't want to stop cycling, but my kids say it's too dangerous for me now, and things like that. So it really starts to limit the populations that can feel comfortable out using active modes. And just to end off that point, on some of the initiatives that are coming out and doing good work in my work with older adult cycling, it's not necessarily an equity initiative, but it functions in that way, is older adult cycling groups. They get people out and they help to break down some of those barriers that can stop people from feeling comfortable out on the street, just going out in groups. I did the similar work in the United Kingdom as well, looking at walking groups for older adults as well. And I heard so often, I wouldn't go out and walk by myself, but when I'm in a group, it helps to break down those barriers. It makes me feel more comfortable, makes me feel more safe.
Right. And that's, I know we have Leslie Maxwell here from student transportation, and she does a lot of work about walking school buses and things like that. And just Samantha, when you were talking about the changes to the street from over the past 100 years or more, that just made me think of over the past 2 years with the pandemic. It was quite striking when everyone was told to lock down and back in 2020 and stay home. How much room you could see then was the space was empty, right? And space that's given, public space that's given over to cars and vehicles. And you think, what can we do with that space? Parking lots, roadways, whatever. If it were prioritized for people or other activities. But RC, I don't know if you wanted to, we're very quickly running out of time. So I don't know, RC, if you wanted to weigh in on that question, and then I'll just have one more, and we're going to have to unfortunately wrap this up.
Yeah, just a quick one on my side, because we were talking about locally, what are some of the top initiatives. And the thing that immediately came to mind is really in 2020 with our 30-kilometer plus temporary COVID bike lanes. Unfortunately, it's temporary, but what I was hoping when I saw that was it will be installed, it's temporary, it's a few months, we can use it, but I was really hoping there's a continued conversation about those bike lanes. I saw firsthand, just myself, first time I visited a really good friend in Kitchener. biking to his place was because of the temporary COVID bike lanes. And as I was biking, I biked a number of times. I can see different people, different kinds of bikes. It's one of the times wherein I was so excited seeing different types of bikes, not the expensive ones, so just different colors and so on. And I get to follow some of them when I was using the temporary COVID bike lanes. But I think just looking at that experience and with those bike lanes being able to connect mainly Waterloo and Kitchener, having some access to some communities, be it quiet neighborhood roads, to some trails. I started in the University of Waterloo area, so there's that connection. Then going on Westmount, I felt really safe, and I think that's one key aspect to getting more people to try biking, is they will feel more safe. I saw a family biking, or actually even walking. I think there was also an increase in where the bike lanes are, of people walking, because there's now a buffer between between me outside my house or my apartment and the road, the cars. And so there's that uptick. I think we counted the bikes. I don't know if we have some numbers with regards to walking. And I think there's definitely a big number of people walking as well. So that's really what came to mind when you asked that question, Dorothy. And I think that those connections, people feeling safe, and also like on Westmount, I can see a number of like buildings. I think those are rental apartments, if I'm not mistaken. So people can now see, hey, there's a bike lane right there, and I can use it. Like like they have access to a bus stop. I think there's a bus stop nearby, but there's another option for just going around the city. Yeah, and I think a good number of people tried it out. Was there for a few months. If we had the conversation of then planning for making it really a permanent separated bike lane, then I think it will continue that momentum that the temporary COVID bike lane did. And it was really the region and members of our community who really drove like to install those temporary bike lanes.
Yeah, no, that's true. And give a shout out to Regional Councillor Galloway, because he certainly helped us from an elected position. So just
Dorothy, could I just I would like to describe Recycle Cycles, because I don't think that was as a really important local initiative that started actually in 1994 with university students, but it kind of became a stranded project in a unheated warehouse, a barn actually, garage, and then we located it on the second floor of 43 Queen in downtown Kitchener, and it became it's been an important community bike shop for more than 20 years now, but it's never had any support. So the working center has to either generate revenue for its staffing, or from selling bikes. So that kind of resource that helps, if you're to hang around Recycle Cycles every day, there's people at the door, who are just trying to get their bikes fixed. New Canadians trying to get a small bike for their kids, or trying to get access to bikes. And so, that's the kind of infrastructure there could be 3 or 4 Recycle Cycles in a community, because it's every neighborhood that would use it. When we set up bike camps, I remember doing a bike camp at Paulander, and the first day, like 50 kids showed up, and like there was no warning or anything. We just set up bike stands, and 50 people showed up, because that's the kind of demand there is for those kinds of skills. And so the community really, I know Red Raccoon is out there trying to do the same kind of stuff now. It's it's really the infrastructure of a community that cares about building bikes, making bikes important, and then kind of building those small projects that that helps more people to cycle.
Right.
And also recycles, trains people in bike repairs. These are all things that are necessary and makes biking comfortable.
Right. And it's that's a really great segue, and we'll have to make this the last question. I think we will need to wrap it up, but it's been really rich and interesting. But you know, Joe, you've kind of already answered this, but my last question was, if you think about our own local community, whether that's Cambridge, Baden, Waterloo, you know, pick one of our communities here. You know, could each of you think of 2 or 3 concrete actions that either an elected official could take, a municipal staff person could take, you know, me as an individual citizen could take, or a group could do, you know, in say the next 6 months, maybe the next year or so? Kind of, you know, any kind of concrete actions that you might recommend that people think about doing? RC, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, yes. For me, it's related to part of the discussion, and this is really with neighborhoods, specifically equity-deserving neighborhoods. When several projects, several discussions with different groups, I always see a map, and it's a cycling map and cycling infrastructure. I think it will be important locally that there's that up as part of the map, and this is because I saw the mapping project. I think it will be important to have or to identify the locations of those equity-deserving communities, and be able to say, when we expand our active transportation network and even our transit network, when we move things around and we plan for the future, is that if there's an identified equity-deserving group in an area like Waterloo, Kitchener, wherever in the region, then the active transportation network and transit network should go through it, should be very close to it, so that it will be used by a lot of members of our community. I think that's one of the things that can be done in the next like 6 months to 12 months. The other one that came to mind, and this is something as I was preparing for this session, is the Infrastructure Canada has an active transportation fund. And I think a number of groups have been waiting for it to that apply link to be active. So they announced it in July, so that was 6 months ago. And they haven't activated it. But I think that's one of the things that I hope our city regional team can apply for projects for using the active transportation fund.
Right. Other people's money is always a fantastic way to go. Thanks for that, RC. No, but it is good to know that the federal government is coming out with some of that. So maybe Cornell next, and then Samantha, you could wrap it up.
Yeah, I prepared a quick list of the 6 most important things that we would need, or that we need. And funding is on that list, but you know which one in sequence? It's not the first, it's actually the 5th. So funding is important. Somebody wants to give us 10 million or 15, I will never say no, but I mean, that is not the most important thing. And I've lived through a number of years in my previous job where actually we have more funding than support to do things.
Interesting.
And okay, let me just very quickly say what's before the funding. But again, I'm not downplaying the importance of funding. I'm just saying that there are many other things that we can do until we get the funding. And what first is, of course, sustained political and public support. I mean, and I think that we have that. Second, institutional support, which is within the organization. The structure has to support it. And I think we are having quite good institutional support in the region, which has changed. And I heard lots of negative things about the region and active transportation while in the last years. But actually, I can tell you that, I mean, things are not so bad. Actually, there has been lots of effort done. Maybe it's not so visible, but there's, as I said, cultural change has to happen, and it is happening, and it's happening very quickly. We need support in policies, processes, and design guidelines, which takes time, because we have, I mean, the region and the cities, everything is, we are following processes, you know? I mean, how do we design roads? How do we go with public consultation? And those have to, how do we assess development proposals from developers? How do we respond? What we can ask them to do? Because we can't ask them everything. You know, I have been asking to put the cycle tracks in front of their development, and actually they won't, because that's not just part of that whole process. So we are working on it. I have been working on that even before. So it is possible, but it is painful. It's not easy. So that was the third. Fourth, support from high level of governments. We have to work with MTO quite a bit. I mean, we have the freeways, interchanges, and the bridges across the freeways are a huge barrier. And we have some successes with that, so it's not hopeless. I mean, Frederick Street will be rebuilt, and I mean, we have managed to put in cycling facilities in the plans. Hopefully it will happen. Separated cycling facilities, high quality, so that when Frederick continues further to the west, with the cycling facilities, we already have the bridge there. So, I mean, that is, once we do it, then it's there for 70 years or 100 years or forever. So that was the fourth, support from higher level of governments. Fifth, funding. And sixth is time and patience that I need from the community and from those who really want to see things to happen today or tomorrow. Because it won't happen today or tomorrow, you know, you won't see immediately things, but within a year you will start to see things. And for that we need patience and time, because we have to survive those difficult times until until we start to put things so that people see that, oh, really, this is happening.
Momentum.
Okay.
Okay, thanks for that. I feel like that's some insider information and knowledge that Cornel's giving us a glimpse at inside the region, how the workings are going. So thanks for that. And Samantha, maybe some final comments from you on this part.
Yeah, for sure. So I think this is a little bit of an academic answer, but when I first saw concrete and short term and relating to equity, all I could think is, well, everything's an iterative process, and these things take time. So finding those kind of quick wins often are really hard to identify in any of these categories. But given that, I did think a little bit about what we could do. And I would say, particularly from municipal planning and municipal engineering perspectives, a key piece of talking about equity and active transportation is making sure that we're talking to the people we should be talking to. And that involves having very sometimes creative consultation methods. Sometimes our consultation methods that we do don't always reach the whole community. And so it might take some different approaches, but that is the work that's worthwhile in terms of making sure that we ask people what they want to see and what would matter for them in the process and how active transportation would work for them, which I think is a really key piece. And also in all equity work, I think listening is so important. Hearing what people have to say and responding to that and doing that iterative process. It's about listening, proposing solutions, and coming back so often. And I think that's something that we can all do when we work in active transportation, is try to consider as many different experiences that might not be your own.
Right. Yeah, very good advice. Joe, did yeah.
I'd like to just keep building on some ideas. Back in 1990, 92 with Bike Master Plan, it was all about shared bike lanes. So sharing the road. And the worst two examples in Kitchener, in front of City Hall on Duke Street, where they, it's a 2-lane road before the LRT. And it was like, share the road, and it was, you know, oh yeah, at your risk. And same with Queen Street, you know, which I've cycled down thousands of times. And it's just, so just two examples. On Queen Street, it's always bothered me that you have center in the square, you have a park, you have the library, you go all the way out to Weber. It's all regional city land. And there's never been a way to cycle through all that. And so someone who lives right near there, it's always like, just how frustrating can that be when you have to cycle onto Queen Street? But another good side though is recognizing what City of Kitchener did this year, which is to really turn around Joseph Street and create a lane. Like they really chopped it up and created a dedicated cycling lanes. Mm-hmm. And so totally opposite to the ideas of the 1990s. Right. And I think it's a much better idea. Right. So that's a really good initiative. Just City of Kitchener should be recognized for that. And I'm sure the other cities have done stuff like that, but it's really clear in downtown.
Right. Yeah, that was a really great initiative. So, yeah, I'm just thinking, given the expertise and the experience and the backgrounds that you have that each of you have on this panel, we could talk, I think, for the rest of the evening. And I feel really badly that I have to cut this off, but we do need to get to our breakout rooms. So I do just want to say thank you so much. I really liked what I was hearing from all of you about, culture, creativity, really, consulting very creatively and really listening. But I really like that the expression of the community infrastructure, right? And infrastructure obviously is important, from the hard infrastructure that people like Cornell are planning and building, but also that community infrastructure that that Joe was referencing about the establishing these bike camps in a community and just kind of supporting what helping that flourish is a big part of it as well, and seeing where we can support some of that work. So I do have to leave it there, and I really just want to thank each of you again for the information that you provided, the expertise, and the obviously the passion that you have for this subject. Thank you so much. And I can see the chat was very active, but I wasn't able to I was listening too closely. I didn't actually follow the chat too closely, but I will turn it over to Samantha now. And again, just to say thank you so much to all of you for giving us your time tonight, and hope we can. Obviously, you guys will be very instrumental in continuing this conversation. So thank you so much.